of the members in the audience about the function and authority of the urban design panel. The panel gives impartial and professional advice to the Director of Planning, Development Permit Board, or City Council on any proposal or policy affecting the community's physical environment. The panel is strictly an advisory body and makes recommendations only. It does not have the authority to approve or refuse projects or make policy decisions. Panel meetings are open to public attendance, but the meetings are not a forum for public comment. Depending on the type of project process, there are always opportunities for public input. Welcome to the panel. Mr. Borowski, if you could complete the form and introduce your team.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Greg Borowski from Merrick Architecture. And my colleague Peter McRae to my left, our client George Abood, who's the owner and resident of that house on the property we're talking about today. Maybe could you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm RJ McCulloch. I'm the Heritage Consultant representing Donald Luxon and Associates.
I'm Jennifer Stanforth, directing Commercial Landscape Architects.
And the address is 1862 Barclay Street. The zoning is RM5B. It's a complete application, first review. So we will start by Mr. Black's presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to do something a little unusual because this is an unusual proposal. Rather than run over to the model and start poking the branches, I'm going to bring us back to the basic intents of this district schedule, because this is a proposal within existing zoning, albeit, as I said, an unusual one. The basic intent of the schedule is to permit a variety of residential developments, with emphasis on achieving development that's compatible with neighboring development with respect to streetscape character, open spaces, view retention, sunlight access, and privacy. Going over to the guidelines then immediately note that it may not be possible to achieve all of those objectives. For each site, there will be conditions that may require giving preference to one design approach over another. The balancing of those objectives has to occur and be acknowledged, but for every site, the emphasis should be on ensuring livability and compatibility with adjacent development with respect to streetscape, open space, view, sunlight access, and privacy. And I think the architect will say a little bit more about each of those topics that he's considered in turn. Two specific parts of the guidelines are worth noticing because they're germane here. One is on heritage. And the guidelines do note that many heritage buildings are located in the West End, and they contribute to its character and architectural diversity. And when developing a site with a heritage building, as this one is, options that will allow its retention should be explored. With regard to side yards are noted as one of those features in the West End that helps to establish street rhythm, ensure that side-facing units receive daylight, permit views between buildings, and create open space. And depending on site context, side yards can be varied to achieve these objectives. A side yard should only be decreased when a corresponding increase in yard areas elsewhere achieves another planning objective, such as the creation or expansion of view corridors, improving daylight and privacy, and does not adversely affect adjacent units. But a zero lot line, that is, no side yard at all, may be acceptable in circumstances where there are obvious public benefits. So that said, I'm now going to fly over to the model, so I invite you to join me and we can all poke the branches together. This is a small site. This is only 33 feet wide. You can see the scale of area that the architects and landscape architects have to work with here in this particular case. It's essentially a spot. It's been blocked. It doesn't enjoy the corner exposure. It is a good model in terms of demonstrating the various greenery that's on site and proposed as new. There's my obligatory token of new model. It's 131 feet deep, so there is some capacity in terms of its depth. The proposal is, as you've seen in your packages, for a 6-story infill building here located at the back of the site. The overall form is within the 60-foot height limit that's recommended in zoning. There's a very good pair of diagrams in the boards, and I think also in your package. One which shows the envelope that's recommended here. And by envelope, I don't mean the maximum height, the cap of 60 feet. I mean the slope envelopes here that are intended to preserve some daylight, sunlight access for the streets, for example, for neighboring developments. Unusually in this case, the proposed intrusion into that angled portion of the envelope, not the total height, is on the lane side. That's explained a little bit more as well in a kind of schematic form here. where the architect has laid out those parts of development that are not occurring because the existing heritage house is being retained, versus those intrusions into the recommended envelope and maximum height for the portions of the building. As I said, primarily the ones toward the lane. There's a little nubbin of elevator penthouse on the very top here that can potentially be considered as architectural pertinence, but I wouldn't mind your comments on the elevator and other aspects and those questions when I get back to the desk. I mentioned side yards in the intro there. That is one of the main areas of discretion that's being sought here. Side yards are essentially 1 or 2 inches from the property line both sides. Is that accurate? It's noted as 0.1 feet. Yeah, good point. So for these pieces, the side yard is reduced to that 0.1 feet. But the side yards of the existing building, I believe, are maintained exactly as they are. And they're probably about 3 feet on this side, 4 feet on this side. There is a separation that's offered between the new infill building and the retained portion of is it the Mason residence? Of about 14 feet from this base to the retained piece of Mason residence there. Am I using the right word? Is that retained or is that a new wall? Or a restored wall under my pen right there?
It's a restored wall, so some of it is original and some of it will need to be rebuilt because additions to the house have compromised the integrity of the original wall. So we're trying to keep it.
So in other words, as typical for heritage project, there's no simple answers to these kind of questions. Yes. Okay. That's basically the things I wanted to point out to the panel, just in terms of reference back to policy and the guidelines that we have to work from. Greg will, and the representative from Toronto Storey will go through the landscape architectural design for more detail. I would appreciate if you touched a little bit on the exterior expression, material choices and the like. This is a complete application, so we do want detailed comments from you. I'll throw the questions at you, but I do also have a printed copy here at Madam Chair's desk, so you can let them reread to you. We're looking for your comments on the architectural and landscape design in general, and in particular, the new form of development that would be created as seen within the Barclay Streetscape, retained house, retained dimensionality of the front yard setback from the property line to the face of the building, some modifications to grade to give better access to the dwelling on the ground floor, the sidewalls that come down to your property line at the back, but the retention of the sidewalls for the Mason residents in the front. We're looking for your comments on the buildings, especially the new buildings' relationship to existing buildings. There's some floor plans that are indicated schematically here that explain to you where the windows are of the adjacent neighbors. And without giving away the game too much, I would say it's fair to say that is the single largest and most specific impact to adjacent neighbors would be from the living dining room of this window relative to the wall that's proposed here. Most other windows are somewhat further away. In the case of the tower, there's quite a considerable side yard separation, for example, and good access to daylight toward the inside. And lastly, we are looking for your comments on the detailing and the expression of the new building. Thank you.
Maybe you could comment on how you determine the shadow light impact on the adjacent residents in this area, and in particular, do you take into account the fact that maybe they're rental and therefore limited to time? You're definitely blind to that side of it.
Yeah, resident is a resident. For some other aspects of planning, for example, calculating CACs and what the value of a new development might be, rental does have an influence. But for the impact to a person, they're just a resident. It's the same thing, whether they're renters, owners, buyers. They could even be absentee landlords who live in Australia and jet in once a year. Yeah. We assume they care.
Okay. Okay, so in respect to that answer you've just given me, how do you determine the appropriateness of a mid-rise tower that is adjacent?
That's a great question. It's exactly why we're here today.
Okay. Right. And if I may, one other. We have partial basement adjacent to a basement next door existing. I think that's on the side. And how do you work out who has the right to excavate down? How does that work out? I mean, quite often when you excavate down, you have thank you,
Yeah, will have to be by mutual agreement with the neighboring property owners. So indeed, we have to ensure that their structure remains there while we excavate. So it is underpayment to hold that. Okay. So it depends whether the depth of our garage is lower than the depth of our garage, of their garage that we excavate. So
yes.
I'm not actually sure of that yet, but if we're higher up, then we don't have to maintain them in the air as we go below. We're only going down one level, so we're likely to be very close to what their excavation level is.
There's a drainage issue as well, the drain tile usually associated with that. Anyway, go thinking about that.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Google. Any other questions? The zoning envelope, was that meant to protect or give exposure to sunlight under a certain line? The zoning envelope in this direction, so you have a slope essentially that's above the line. Currently, if you're looking at that particular drawing here, the worst condition, June 21st, actually shadows the lane in its entirety.
Yes.
Is there a particular sort of desire from the city doing this to actually not shadow the lane,
No, the envelopes in the zoning are generally intended to serve daylight and sunlight access. I don't think there's anything in guidelines or description that says lanes are special or not special. We've seen other policy contexts like Camp Porter with lane application is required.
Yeah.
Here, I don't believe that's what
All right, okay, because if you were to look at that and look at this tower casting a larger shadow, you know, it's anyway, just wondering what the policy was on that.
all risk for discussion.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Maybe address it when you go through, and it's going to do with that we have this existing heritage structure, wood frame, somewhat soft response, nice degree to a more rigid tower adjacent to why actually connected. So, okay, I'll just leave it here.
So, if there is no questions for Mr. Black, we will start with the architect's presentation.
Okay, thank you. We have three parts which we'll try to keep brief. The architectural presentation, landscape, and also the heritage. So I think we'll try to keep those compact and try to address the range of issues. So this project came to us very unusually. The owner said he wished to build a new building. So knowing the neighborhood and living just up the street, in fact, I had gone by this house a lot, and I've always kind of loved this house. And so when the owner approached us, he said, well, yeah, you can build a new building. You can actually build a new 6-story building. That would be allowable under the zoning. But you have to consider alternatives, maybe to look at building a new building and actually keeping an existing building, maybe restoring the existing building. So the question of which is, well, you know, what's in it for the owner in doing that? Well, for one thing, he gets to keep the house. We believe it's of interest to the neighborhood. We've spoken to a number of neighbors about that. We seem to be very keen on that idea, actually. Public information we have responded to. So our instinct was that might be a good plan to try to do that. But obviously realize that with all the rights that would retain on the property. So we pursued that avenue. We could acquire a plan, the heritage plan, and they said there's an opportunity here. We take a look at it, bring it forward. So the opportunity really in part comes out because the house as it is presently has been added on to quite a lot of the back. So in the effort of trying to restore the house to its original kind of salt block volume, it opens up a degree of area at the back of the site to be able to put an infill building in. And that infill building would have parameters similar to what a new building could have if you could build it outright under the zoning. So the height, for example, is consistent with the 60 feet allowed under the zoning for building a new building here. We could build a new building back to the alignment adjacent to the lane that we're showing. The main variant, I guess, is the side yard setback at 2 locations. And part of the rationale behind that is, in principle, as some other projects have done, they've moved the house forward. So we could basically build a building of a certain size if we moved the house forward. And that would be, you know, it would we would meet the side yard setback requirement. But we felt that that was not a good thing to do because part of the whole character of the house is the fact that it's set back from the street. And this is one of the few original non-elaborate houses in the West End. It's like a house owned by someone who's very kind of, reasonably modest means, not mansion. So the front yard setback was part of the whole greenery and relationship to the streetscape that we felt was worth maintaining. So we felt that the notion of altering that side yard setback would be equivalent in floor area to if we just extended it longer. And the other question is it bothering anybody? So when we look at the building here, we see that there are bedroom windows this side, and there are living room windows this side. When we look at this building, we see there are bedroom windows this side, a living room window on this side for the bottom 3 floors. Now the bottom 3 floors, there's presently a garage there that affects the bottom 2 floors. So as far as angle of view out, the angle is quite compromised as it is. The 3rd floor, there isn't, but there is quite a large tree at that location. So yeah, the tree in the winter, you can see through it. So it does narrow the angle of view on the 3rd floor, but it's arguable maybe on the 1st and 2nd floor whether building in this configuration intrudes more into the view than the present garage does in the back. So the ambition was to at least realize those kind of angles of view that would be available if we built a new building. And so by actually setting back towards the lane and sculpting it that way, we do get the kind of angles of view that would be allowed if we were to do simply a new building. And of course, it allows us to keep the front yard identity. Some of the floor area of the building is actually contained in the lower floor of the house. So around 800 square feet of the floor area is basically regained in the lower floor. That was always just a whole space kind of basement at this present. So we're basically proposing to excavate, not raise the house, keep it in exactly its present location, and excavate down. So that explains that little lower garden in the front that Jennifer will talk about. And in terms of the relationship with the house, we considered this building as kind of what would happen is in the visual field of the house. So as you come along the street, in fact, until you get to about this point here, you can't really see the house. It's actually, the trees are so dense on both sides. Obviously in the winter, there's no visibility to the house. But in the summer, right about here, you start to see the house and you start to be able to see above the house. So by putting a new building in the visual field behind the house, we wanted to create kind of a silent partner to a house. A house is quite eclectic in its character with this Dutch Dutch gable-style roof, and to keep very simple geometry, very simple language to the building behind it. So it's almost just like a picture frame which the house sits in. And similarly with the color, we considered a whole variety of different colors. In the end, we kept coming back to what's the best color to sit behind these kind of deep colors of that character house, and decided we would like to use this white brick with a black fleck as a ceramic brick, so it has this light sheen to it as well. But that would be a fairly kind of neutral backdrop to the house and would bring out the qualities of the house rather than creating a whole new dialogue of elements. And similarly with the elevator, we kind of mute the language of the elevator by using a butt joint curtain wall system. So it's basically frameless looking and have some frits in it. So again, it's kind of muted. You don't just see right through to all the mechanisms inside the elevator. You see this kind of slightly muted wall in which the elevator goes up and down. And when you're inside, you can see out because it just has basically stripes of frit. And then in terms of approaching the new building, we brought out this entry pavilion to the front of the lot, and then brought a fence that brings you back towards the new building, and basically draws your eye back. You say, well, how do you know you're supposed to go there from the street, even though it seems to be sitting in the back garden? So that notion of kind of stretching out, and Don Luxton called it putting the arm around Gran, just kind of reaching out, go beside it but not touching it.
So you actually go in this spot here, right?
So you go in right here and along the side.
Okay.
Where's the side issue lateral here?
So there's an entry pavilion right there that gives you the address, and then as your way in, and the gate opens and you go to the back. And Jennifer will talk a little about the landscape experience as you look down that axis. What you see, what draws you back there, what's the other than the fence that you're following on the side. The other aspect is, because this is the south orientation, because the downtown grid is rotated 45 degrees, all the main living spaces and the master bedroom space are on the south orientation. So nice large decks were critical, and we looked at using also this accordioning wall system, wood door system. So the idea is you could open up those wood doors and just flow out. So in summer, you could just extend your space out to the balconies. The suites were arranged such that there's the top 2 floors of the house are one suite. The lower floor of the house is another suite that could be rental if George decides to have his brother live there or someone else live there. And then the main building has a very compact studio type suite on the ground floor, and then one suite per floor for levels 1 to 4, and level 5 and 6 are one suite combined, along with the roof terrace up at the top. You take, it's simple, you come along the pathway, you come into the lobby here, you take the elevator up, and then your view is kind of opened up as you go up above the house, because you can see through the glazing out to the mountains. And such view as you can see between the other buildings, because the west end is fairly dense. But there are snippet views of all sorts of things we anticipate as you go up. In terms of sustainability, effectively we have a pretty low window to wall ratio. It's quite high percentage. The heating cooling system will be radiant. A lower mat system in the new building. In the old building, we're proposing to have a radiant system that's actually set between the floorboards, so it'll you can get heat both heating and cooling, which we've been working on with Cobalt. So that's also low energy use. And of course the overhangs on the south side and the west side. As the sun comes around here, it gets fairly low angle, and at some point, indeed, it kind of sneaks in and around these buildings. But there is some blockage from this building. These buildings have very little outlook here. This is mostly this way. There are some stairs actually that have windows here. The primary windows are here. There's some here. But very little outlook in here, and some fairly large bushes, which go up about maybe 2 stories. This one's around 8 or 9 stories, and it has windows in the back, just beside the frontage here. Similarly, this has some windows along this side as well. Anyway, the intent was to retain privacy for the existing residents. The shadow of the new building, if you see the shadow patterns in the morning from this building and mid-afternoon from this building, you'll see they go right over this building here. So it's really in around like noon and afternoon where you start to see some shadowing in this area. Yeah, the intent is to basically be able to keep this house, I think, is a nice piece of history, and to develop behind it in such a way that it will be complementary but not imitative of the existing house. We have a car share space. We have a car elevator, so we're bringing vehicles down to the lower level. We were going to originally just do basically lease parking from the neighboring building, which is still a possibility actually as well, but the owner was concerned to have some secure parking on site. He knew he could definitely have, he could never be cancelled by anybody. So that's the reason why we kept a minimum of parking as 5 spaces on the property. Maybe get Jennifer to say.
If I could just ask a quick question, so I'll get my head around this.
Can I
Sure. Yeah.
leave that to the end after the presentations are done?
Okay, sure.
Craig's talked a lot about the character between the 2 buildings, and certainly the landscape echoes that. We have looked to use a more heritage plant palette and also material palette for heritage house, and then use a more contemporary material palette, once again, plant material and the baby types for the new infill in the back. There's several areas that I'll touch upon for landscape. The first is the front door of the heritage house. The intent is to keep as much of the existing northern impact as possible while excavating out the We have looked at stepping the front yard and patio, tearing it down rather to get to the patio, to really try to create a livable space down there so it doesn't feel as though it's much below the street. And using the landscape as a layer and filter from being below grade of the adjacent sidewalk. It is a fairly wide patio, I'd say it's a minimum 8 or 12 feet, so it is a good depth. As Greg indicated, there is the entry pavilion on the side here, and what we've also looked at doing, which unfortunately the model doesn't capture, is putting a water feature at that end. There's another sort of indicator, both visual and audible at the end of that corridor as you do your 90-degree into the front door. And we have also an entry to the lower studio unit there. And again, we've made a departure of the paved material, so it doesn't feel like a main entry to a building, but almost a more intimate entry to a single unit. At the back, we also have another small garden off that back studio unit here, and a fairly good sized patio. As you move up the building, the main spaces, the main patio spaces are off the back. There are 2 smaller patio spaces on, I guess that would be level 5 or 6, 5, that we've looked at mostly just planting up. And then there's the top patio space that is thought to be an outdoor entertainment space with an outdoor kitchen, and looking at putting either artificial turf or real turf up there, depending on maintenance challenges that we face. That's good. Thank you.
And then, very briefly, I'll just talk about some of the heritage value of the house. As Greg had mentioned, this is an eclectic mix of style with a bit of British arts and craft tradition, which is very common in the city, with the Dutch-style gambrel roof, with similar cladding styles as you would find at the house built 1901, 1902, making it actually one of the oldest remaining houses in the West End. Certainly on the block, as you can see here, this house is the last remaining. So this is another great effort that we've seen, because this is the last chance to save one of the original homes in this block in the West End. So the overall restoration and preservation strategy of the house is very sensitive. It respects some of the standards and guidelines of restoration, conservation, and historic places in Canada. Everything that we have detailed in our conservation plan is, again, a very sensitive approach we can take to conservation, whereas we can keep the house in J2, which is, again, the least intrusive way of dealing with a heritage house. So it remains in place. The excavation does not raise the profile of the house, not raising it. So again, it's the scale, the form, the character of the house, everything is maintained throughout the whole process, which again is the best case scenario for the heritage perspective. Some of the features of the house through the years have been altered. Very few, in fact, over the past 110 years. It's pretty remarkable that this house has remained so intact. A few of the windows on the front, the sashes have been replaced, but again, those will be restored with sashes that match the character of the original house. A couple of just minor repairs on the cladding, and the excavation will be a change, and will be a new set of doors accessing the ground floor suite. But again, everything has been very sensitive, and it respects the entire heritage character of the house, and it will maintain its character as a very unique house along Ocean South. Very, very different technology from housing in the West End, and will sort of remain, hopefully, another 110 years. It's a very unique piece of country.
Just one last point then is the Dr. Peter Center in the West End is one perhaps analogous reference. In fact, the way the visitor building built on the side of the old heritage houses in Fall Hill. And also there's a very light touching between the new building and the old building. There's usually a glass volume to the joints. Back to the question about how they're joined. Well, I presume we're going to have some kind of slip joint between the structures that was in concrete. From a code perspective, Ken Chow has called this a combustible, non-combustible building. I don't really know what that means, but it allows you to do a wood building with a concrete building. And it allows you to have wood elements as well in the new building. So part of that you can also see if you get your eye down low on the lane side, there's a vocabulary word that's in the softer areas as well, so it picks up. It's not as evident from the bird's eye here, but it's a language of word that enriches that color from walking down the street.
Yeah, this is what I need to try and get my head around. You mentioned that alternative one was to build, a mid-rise building. Alternative two was to retain facade. So, if you'd gone with alternative one, just a mid-rise structure, for the FSR allowed, would it have been a slightly larger volume of a mid-rise building? Would it have impacted the centre part more?
How if we'd gone with the allowance in the zoning, which normally would be considered to be about 1.5 FSR, we could have gone firstly to 6 stories. We could have gone to the relationship of the lane as we have it. The site, obviously, we wouldn't do 0 lot line along this component, and we have about the setback that we provide here. So the building profile might look, much like it does, minus the house.
So what I'm trying to find out is the net effect of retaining this. Is the net effect more or less equal to the existing occupants of this building, or is it by retention of the structure greater?
I guess it would depend where the building was situated on the site. So potential at level 3, if it was situated further that way, they would have at the 3rd floor more openness. The 2nd floor and the 1st floor, the garage that's there presently basically clips their view as they're looking out in that direction. In fact, I think there's slightly more view on the ground floor with what we're proposing than with the garage. And at the 2nd floor, because the roof is sloping of the garage, there's a little bit more effectively where we'd be allowed to place the building where we're placing it.
Thank you. I asked the question differently, and you can probably answer this. Did this go through an HRA agreement?
This will require an HRA as part of the
So the extra density from retaining the house is not put onto this project, that was the thing.
This is on-site.
It's on-site, okay.
What's being created here is on screen.
Okay, and it's maxed out. Is all the density that you're able to create from the uplift on this maximized here in this property? You don't have an extra?
Are we creating manual density?
Yeah.
That's not the intent of this project. There's nothing there.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
The basement and foundations, are they going to be completely reconstructed?
Of the existing house, it's likely to be completely reconstructed. Right now, I think there's a close to granite or a concrete wall, actually. Peter, do you remember? There's concrete, yeah. But in order, basically, we go kind of piece by piece in order to not disturb where the house is. We kind of excavate things at 3 feet at a time and we put in a new wall.
So you'll do it in situ. The reason I'm asking
Yes.
is that passageway on this side is so narrow. I was wondering if during the reconstruction of the basement, there was a chance to nudge the house over to a 0 lot situation on this side by yourself.
I guess it would be a more radical thing compared to excavating down and keeping it in the position that it is now. There's a pathway, it's just about 4 feet on this side, but it is fairly narrow. It's even narrower actually on this side.
Yeah.
It gets under 3 feet on that side.
But you don't have circulation.
No, that's right.
Any other questions? I have a couple of questions. Is there a material wall?
Yes, the far end here.
Okay. And also, can you elaborate on the parking? How the parking is working? You mentioned there is 5 parking spaces.
Yes. There are 2 at grade. So one is a car share space here and one is a parking space here, which is contained in the garage. And this is the lift that brings you down to below. So as you come down to below, you can go into this stall, this stall, and this stall. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So if that's you have to maneuver your back up.
You actually do this and this. So we run the geometry with Bunt. So Bunt have demonstrated that that can be met. It's obviously really tight. So a small car would be better, but the owner was keen to keep, have a component of parking on site, not just have it leased from adjacent. So that's why we put it there.
Thank you.
Just maybe.
Any other questions?
Can I have a small question? Did you have a neighborhood consultation or this particular project, specifically the people that are living here?
So we as a city did not. As a pre-application exercise, we recommend that we have to do this.
We had representation from that building. We spoke to them on at least 3 occasions, including a public information meeting. So we've had no objections raised by them. Similarly for this building as well. So they've been advised all of the materials that you see here regarding side yard setback were displayed at the public information meeting. We specifically brought it up with both of those neighborhood groups and raised concern.
Yeah, the quorum units on this particular building have, an impact on you from level 3 up, right? This building being so close and so far back into the line, just one of it's about 3 units.
Well, there's one at level 3 and one at level 2 already cut off.
Oh, by the brush, yeah. So just one unit.
Just one unit, yeah.
Got it.
Correct. But I guess we thought if we build a new building, we would be allowed to build it in that location, including to this kind of outside corner could be right there. So your angle of view from that building, at least theoretically, is similar to what it is.
So just as a break reference, I'll throw in the normal side yard requirements are about 6.8 feet on each side. So if you push back about 7 feet from the property lines, you push back another 7 feet from the rear yard, that's the off-the-shelf zone. That's the starting place that we would expect people to do comparisons to. So it's somewhat similar to what Greg is pointing out here, although dimensionally a bit more constrained if you follow the painted lines in the regulation. But those are rocks, and that's one of the reasons we're here.
One quick question on the landscape. With a depressed patio,
Yes.
I suspect we may end up interrupting some of the root system of the existing trees.
There are a number of existing trees in the front. There are 2, one of which is not over a certain caliber size that needs to have a removal permit or even for the city's say, I guess, a tree removal association. So there's, I think, just one evergreen magnolia. And we would look to work with an arborist to prune that prior to the season of excavation starting, just so that the tree is prepared for what's going to hit.
I was actually more concerned about the drainage because now you've got more space in site. Probably the original foundations, the drainage has already been compromised just due to age, effect of whatever. I wonder how you can deal with that problem.
Well, the retaining walls are all going to have drain lines in the back of them. They're going to have perforated drain lines, and then you're going to have an area drain at the base of the patio, right? The other thing we'll have to take a look at is, whether or not the patio is even lowered from the elevation of that basement unit. Concerns of what if the drain fails and what if the water starts to come up, right? But yeah, that's a typical thing that we deal with if we're doing mechanical engineering.
I have another question. Can you elaborate a little on the elevator scheme and its difference from verticality and materiality?
So we're proposing to use a button joint curve wall system, so it's seamless. So you won't see the frame. There will be frames behind the glazing, but you'll see the glass joint to joint, just a silicone joint. And then the actual fritting and the material board, it's a series of thin white stripes. So it's just kind of a haze to it as you look from the street. So it's not a busy pattern or anything. It's just a very kind of calm series of clear glass, white frit, clear glass, white frit, but the frit's about down the line.
So it's not glazed?
It is glazed, yeah.
It is glazed.
This is all
so
glazed,
you can
yeah.
look out.
Yeah, so you go up in the elevator, you
Yes.
look out.
And the material involved is the wood anther.
That's actually a protein or it's a
Yes, or better guide.
wood composite. We figured that was actually very difficult to maintain in that area, where other areas that are more accessible we could use real cedar, but in that area I think it's just not very accessible.
is actually only accessed by the penthouse.
Correct,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so there is no amenity space in this building.
There's no interior amenity space. There's a lobby space to the taller building, and of course there's the front yard, which we're going to retain. It's not a separate designated amenity interior.
The front yard, in fact, is owned privately accessed by these two units, right?
Yes, although you can proceed through the yard and go into the back, but it's not actually blocked. Yeah, it'll end up being a strata, so you could walk in there if you want to. In fact, to get to the lower suite, they might have basically come through here actually and go down the steps from this side. So it's really the main house, the upper floors, where you come in primarily from this side, but you could also come in from that side too.
If there aren't any other questions, we are going to take a few minutes to get the material. I'm going to repeat the questions seeked by Mr. Black on the development. Comments on new form of development within the Barclay streetscape, including the front yard design, open elevator and side walls brought to the loft edges. Relationship of new building to existing residents and to nearby neighbors, including windows. Detailing and expression of the new building. With this, I would like to start by Bruce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I applaud the idea of infill housing in the West End and retaining the heritage character, and just the heritage home in general. I think it's a great model to use in this area of the city, actually in any area of the city. And so from that standpoint, I don't have any problem supporting the project. However, I do have a couple of comments that relate to the three questions, primarily the first one. My preference would be to see grandma embrace the grandchild and not the grandchild embracing grandma. And when I say that, I think what I would really like to see is the character of the front yard and the character of the house be the dominant element on the street. And so when I think about it, mostly goes to the landscape, and I like the landscape, but it goes to the sort of landscape expression and how one approaches the new building. And when I say sort of grandma embracing the grandchild, I think my preference would be to ensure that as you move along the street, along Barclay Street, that in fact the heritage character of the house and the landscape is the dominant element. So from that standpoint, the fence treatment, the landscape treatment, it is all about 1860 Barclay Street, the Mason House, and not about the little low-rise behind. And I think, there's 6 units in that building. Everyone will know how to get to it. So my preference would be to not have the entry pavilion, not have the cedar fencing, but to rather have all that landscape relate 100% to the Mason House and allow someone to then discover the building behind, which I know they will. There won't be any problem with that. But the experience that you'll get on the street, I think, will be much more enriched because you'll really experience the sense of that one house on the street itself. So that goes to the elevator expression, and I completely understand where you're coming from, but I want to pick up the building and flip it around 180 degrees and have the elevator on the alley so that the facing Barclay Street is the quietest face, and there isn't anything that jumps out and says, I'm here. It literally is this background building that does not grab your attention at all. And I know it kind of flies in the face of what you want to do with the building, but that would be my feeling about that building. The distance, the setback distances, and the views and the shadowing and all that. I don't have any problem with any of that. It's just the elevator. I find that it does sort of fly in the face a little bit of too much presence in behind that heritage house, and I couldn't help but continually stare at it, and I didn't want to. I wanted to focus on the Mason House. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Veronica?
I'm going to start by saying that it is such a great opportunity to be able to take this on as an effort There's so many great stories here, and I would say that you've really pushed the idea of attention, you know, in a lot of ways. And I would agree with my colleague about the sort of the lesser importance of the front yard with some of the beginning with the depressing of the front yard, which is more facing, it's a little bit dark, and it diminishes the importance of that particular foreground. But it's also, on the other hand, it's also a great idea because, of course, you give light to more units down below. I don't mind the idea of having the grandma's arm going out there because it really accentuates the sort of the mystery and the procession, which starts with a bit of a compression on the side, and then going in and then discovering more of the space to go up as you ascend through the elevator. So I think it's a great story in that regard. I don't have a problem with the elevator core in the middle. I think compositionally it really does a good job of being framed to the old house. You know, the color choices, the composition, it's muted enough that it actually does the job. So I disagree with you there on that particular regard. I think it's a beautifully conceived idea with the right kind of detailing. So again, you're playing with juxtaposition and pushing the story of tension. If I were to have a complaint about the project in general, it's unfortunate that, like I said, the foreground is depressed. It gives away the opportunity for the house to be much more important from Barclay Street. So there's something there that can be done without losing, as I said, the tension of having, you know, the small arm that comes out and gets you to the back. And the other one is there's one unit, only one, thankfully, that will lose a significant amount of access to light and view from the mid-rise unit. It's unfortunate, but that's probably, you know, that's the way it is. But in terms of area of opportunity, it really is, you know, what do you do with the foreground to actually really increase the presence of the manor or mansion on Barclay Street? There's something there, the solution there somewhere. But otherwise, it's a lot of things done well and a great story added to the street.
Thank you, Veronica.
Actually, I have absolutely no problems with this project at all. I think it's very, very nicely done. It's a great addition to the neighbourhood. I think it'll be a net benefit for the neighbourhood. So I give it my support.
Thank you. Arnaud?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too find this to be a really compelling, very interesting project. Fitting this kind of program into the site is extremely difficult, as we all know, and getting access to parking, locating elevators, there's just only so many solutions that can work here. So I think you've done a really great job of putting all the pieces together. If I focus specifically on the elevator component, which is sort of our first item to comment on, I think generally I think it's in the right spot, just given the constraints you have with respect to getting parking and access off the lane. I guess where I would sort of offer a comment, just for the sake of taking another look at it, is the lobby condition at grade. I'm not sure you actually need an internal lobby for a project this small. You could potentially just delete that piece and actually free up the house completely from the new building at grade and just allow those two pieces to sit comfortably apart from each other. You can easily have a little canopy over the elevator door and enter from the exterior. It's quite common around the city, and that would allow you to actually create another landscape courtyard, which would improve the interface between your neighbors. I think that glass block wall looks like a glass block wall on the zero lot line feels a little uncomfortable to me. If you just delete that, save yourself some money, and landscape that courtyard, I think it might be a little more friendly to your neighbors. The other comment about the elevator, I think at the top, you've got this Podima cladding on it, and I find it to be a little heavy. I'm just wondering if you can just lighten up this elevator altogether. Maybe just go with clear glass, not even have gridded glass. You know, just dematerialize the elevator, and even to the point where perhaps it might be worth investigating an elevator that doesn't need an enclosure. You know, there's exterior elevators, so that when the cab is not there, you actually don't even have a mast attached to the back of the building, which would even improve that relationship between the house and the new building even more. So those are my comments about the elevator. I think my only concern about the relationship to the existing residents is that the daylight angles be maintained. I don't see the daylight angles on the drawings. I think it's just the 2 units on the north, or 3 units on the north side that are sort of looking at. I'm assuming that they will work, but I was just throwing that out. Lastly, on the detailing and expression, I think the white brick against the dark heritage restoration, I think is quite appropriate. I think allowing the new building to be sort of modern and clean, but bringing in these wood elements, I think are all very appropriate. And it's a simple building. I think keeping the material palette to 1 or 2 materials is very appropriate. My only final comment, I guess, on the east facade, I guess north facade facing Barclay Street of the new building, I find it to be a little bit static. There's something about it still that needs, it's just this bilateral symmetry of the elevator. You have just equal divisions of windows on both sides, and I find it a little distracting as some of the comments have been made, that your eye immediately goes to this expression on that facade. I'm just wondering if it's worth taking another look to perhaps play with the mullion patterns and maybe push the elevator off to one side or something, just to break the symmetry a little bit. But otherwise, I think it's a great project, and I really applaud your work. Thanks.
Thank you, Arno. Robert?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think this project is well conceived, and I think it's a reasonable and creative approach to preserving this last heritage structure on the street. I think, you know, there's a series of reasonable compromises that have been made, and you know, I think the net benefit makes those compromises worthwhile. For the new form of development, I think, you know, it's an appropriate modern approach with respect to form and materiality, so I think that's all fine. I'm going to disagree with Bruce also. I think it's critical that pavilion tie the tower to the street, if for other reason than wayfinding, so that you can indeed find that tower. Related to that was this notion of you know, when the excavation is taking place under this building, if you could at least consider the possibility of shifting that building just a little bit. Right now, that circulation to the tower, you have 3'10" less the fence. You're going to be walking single file and brushing up against the side of the building. If you could find a foot or two when you're excavating for that house, I think that would be worth exploring. A 5-foot passageway versus a 3-foot passageway, I think would be a big improvement. I guess my last comment would be that there is a lack of common amenity on the project, and I would encourage you to have another look at that rooftop and see if maybe it wouldn't be better as a common rooftop. That's my comments.
Thank you, Robert. I will offer a few comments on my own for the architect's consideration. I also think that this is a very complex site, and the proposed form of development, you have handled it really well with respect to the parking and the way you have sculpted the building at the back. I think it's an anomaly, and I think it's a welcome anomaly. it's a small development in between all the established high-rises, and it's really well handled. And there is an element of surprise and discovery when you get there and you see the Mason house at the foreground and the 6-story building at the back. I think it would be a welcome addition to the neighborhood. I have a few minor comments. Consider introducing shading devices on the east and west facade. There is going to be a lot of load. We are experiencing it now in August in Vancouver, in lots of buildings. At the moment, they are naked. You need to have some more shading devices if you really want to follow up on your passive type of initiatives, and they are not difficult to introduce on the sites. Also, consider improving that entry experience. It's a very narrow entry, narrow and long, and what I can suggest is you can make that entry. I just think 3'8" of narrow and very long dead-end space may be uncomfortable, especially for people who are visiting the space for the first time. So there may be ways of handling it by landscaping, lighting, and I'm not sure whether or not you can consider reshaping the units facing the access, the main floor, and see whether or not you can make it through. Also, the building has so much presence on the lane, and I'm wondering whether or not you can introduce an entry of the lane. I think entries on the lane could also be interesting. I also would like to echo the previous comments about the elevator element. I think there is room to do more design development and see whether or not that elevator turret is so present that it really deserves lots of design development to make this project bond and make it more interesting on Barclay site. These were my comments. I'm going to repeat a couple of comments that were summarized that were repeated more than one time, and that was the comment with respect to make the heritage house and the landscape dominant, make it more dominant, and pay homage 100% to the Mason house. This came up a couple of times, but there was one panel member that didn't feel the same way. And the other comment that was repeated more than one time was the design development to the elevator turret, maybe more related to the materiality. And also I have one more comment. The success of this project will be to very careful detailing. At the moment on the model, I see balcony edges with, the model is so small that probably doesn't do justice, but very beautiful and skillful detailing would really enhance this project and make it really shine as an element of discovery and anomaly that neighborhood. These are my comments. So with this, show of hand for all members. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Do you have any finishing comments?
Thank you for all your comments, and I think it's interesting the observation about the elevator component. Something probably of anything maybe we've been wondering about as much as anybody ourselves. Thank you for drawing further our attention to that and how that's resolved, and I look forward to exploring that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So all panel members in support of the project? You have the support of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.